The morning in Bakersfield began as usual, with the smell of motor oil and the sound of wrenches in the Carter and Sons auto repair shop. Scott Carter lay under the hood of an old Ford pickup truck, methodically tightening the bolts on a new radiator. Sweat dripped from his forehead, mixing with dirt and oil, but he didn't notice the discomfort. Work was his element, the only place where he felt truly himself. "Scott, phone!" shouted Jake, his partner, poking his head out from under another car. Scott wiped his hands on his overalls and walked over to the old wall phone. Aunt Eleanor's voice sounded cheerful despite her 78 years. "Dear, how are you and Teddy? I thought maybe you'd come over for lunch on Sunday. I'll make your favorite chicken casserole." Scott smiled, picturing the energetic old woman in her spacious house on the hill. Eleanor was the only one in the family who had accepted his new life without questions or judgment. "Of course, Aunt Ellie. We'd love to come. Teddy was just asking about your apple pie." "Great! Tell him I found some old art books. He's into painting, isn't he?" "Yes, he'll be thrilled." Scott mechanically adjusted his baseball cap. "See you on Sunday." Hanging up the phone, he paused for a moment. 5 years ago, he would never have believed that it would be so easy to lie to the person closest to him. But circumstances had forced him to become a master of deception. The workshop was located in an industrial area of Bakersfield, among warehouses and small factories. It was a typical California auto repair shop, a spacious room with an oil-soaked concrete floor, walls hung with tools, and the constant smell of metal and solvents. Scott had inherited the business from his father, who had died of a heart attack 7 years earlier. "Hey, boss," Jake approached him, wiping his hands on a rag. "The Chevy's ready. Mrs. Johnson can pick it up." "Okay, how much is the bill?" $450. Had to replace the brake pads. Scott nodded and wrote the amount in a worn ledger. Money was always a problem. The shop brought in enough to get by, but that was about it, especially with his mother's medical bills. At 5:30, Scott closed the shop and drove home. He lived in a modest one-story house in a working-class neighborhood. The house had been built in the 1950s and needed repairs, but Scott couldn't afford any major investments. Teddy Harris was sitting on the porch, drinking beer and leafing through a magazine. He was the complete opposite of Scott, tall, thin, with long hair and artistic ambitions. He worked at a local bookstore and moonlighted as a portrait artist for tourists on weekends. "How's it going, partner?" Teddy grinned, emphasizing the last word. "Fine. Aunt Ellie's inviting us over for dinner on Sunday." "Great. I just finished a new painting. You can see it." Scott sat down next to him on the steps. They had been friends since childhood, and Teddy was the only person who knew the truth about their relationship. 3 years ago, when Scott had offered him the arrangement, Teddy had initially refused, but $500 a month was a significant amount for a struggling artist. "Listen," Teddy said quietly, "some guy came into the store today. He was asking about us. He said he worked for social services." Scott tensed. What exactly did he ask? How long we've been together, where we met, the usual questions, but there was something suspicious about him. "Did he give you his name?" "Marcus something. Stein, I think." Scott frowned. He didn't know any Marcus Stein, but that didn't mean he should relax. 5 years of deception had taught him to be paranoid. "What did you tell him?" "The usual. That we've been living together for 2 years, met through mutual friends." "Okay, but be careful. If he shows up again, let me know right away." Teddy nodded and finished his beer. Despite their friendship, there had always been a certain distance between them. Scott paid for the service, and Teddy provided it. It was convenient for both parties, but sometimes Scott felt uncomfortable with the artificiality of it. That evening, Scott went to visit his mother. Sarah Carter lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Diabetes had turned the once energetic woman into a constantly tired patient, dependent on medication and dialysis. "How are you, Mom?" Scott asked as he entered the dimly lit living room. "I'm fine, son, although the doctor says I need to have the procedure done more often." "How much will that cost?" Sarah avoided his gaze. "About $1,000 extra a month." Scott felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. He was already struggling to cover his mother's current medical expenses. An extra 1,000 would mean the collapse of their already fragile financial stability. "Don't worry, Mom, we'll manage." "Maybe we should ask Eleanor?" "No." Scott was adamant. "She already does so much for us." It was true. Eleanor regularly helped out with money, but always discreetly, in the form of gifts or paying for services. Scott knew she understood his financial difficulties, but she never made him feel like a needy relative. On the way home, Scott thought about how everything had changed 5 years ago. Back then, he was desperate. His mother had just been diagnosed with diabetes, his workshop was losing money, and creditors were calling with threats. It was then that he overheard Aunt Eleanor talking to her friend. "You know, Doris, I'm so glad Scott has finally found himself. I always felt he was special, and that young man, Teddy, seems very nice." Scott didn't immediately understand what she was talking about. Eleanor had seen him and Teddy together several times and had come to her own conclusions. When he realized that his aunt thought he was gay, his first reaction was to want to fix everything. But then he found out about the will. Eleanor was a childless widow with a considerable fortune. Her late husband had left her a house, stocks, and a substantial bank account. She had no close relatives except Scott and his mother, and she had said many times that everything would go to the person who needed it most. "I know what it's like to be different," she told him once. "In my day, people like you weren't accepted, but times are changing. I want you to know that you will always have a home here." Scott didn't plan to deceive her. He simply didn't correct the misunderstanding, and when Eleanor started inviting him over regularly with Teddy, he realized he had gone too far to stop. 5 years later, he had grown accustomed to his double life. At work, he was a regular mechanic, and with his friends, he was a bachelor in no hurry to get married. And in Aunt Eleanor's eyes, he was a loving nephew who had found happiness with a reliable partner. At home, Scott took a shower and went to bed. Tomorrow would be a normal day. Work, chores, the need to maintain the illusion. He hadn't thought about what would happen when the truth came out for a long time. That possibility seemed too distant and abstract. But Teddy's question today about the stranger made him think. Maybe he should have been more careful? Or on the contrary, was it time to end this game? Scott fell asleep without finding an answer to these questions. He didn't know that tomorrow a man would appear in his life who would change everything, and not for the better. Marcus Stein parked his beat-up Honda near Mabel's Cafe in downtown Bakersfield. This establishment was a city institution, a place where locals gathered to discuss the news, gossip, and life in general. The old leather stools, checkered tablecloths, and smell of bacon created a cozy atmosphere that Marcus so desperately lacked in his new life. He ordered coffee and eggs and sat down at a table by the window. From here, he had a view of the city's main street, a wide thoroughfare lined with shops, offices, and small restaurants. Bakersfield wasn't a pretty city, but it had a sense of stability and rhythm. Marcus had moved here 3 months ago from San Francisco. Officially, it was for work. The Department of Social Services had offered him a position as a youth program coordinator. Unofficially, he was running away from a broken heart and the need to start over. "More coffee, dear?" The middle-aged waitress smiled at him. "Yes, please." Marcus opened his tablet and looked through his to-do list for the day. A meeting with the director of the Social Services Center, visiting families on the registry, paperwork. Routine that was supposed to distract him from thoughts of the past. But yesterday's encounter at the bookstore wouldn't leave him alone. Teddy Harris had seemed strange to him, too tense for someone who was just talking about his relationship. Something about his behavior was suspicious. Marcus had been gay since he was a teenager. He had gone through all the stages: denial, acceptance, coming out, relationships. He had developed a kind of radar for people with non-traditional orientations, and that radar was silent when he looked at Teddy. "Excuse me," he said to the waitress. "Do you happen to know Scott Carter? He owns an auto repair shop." "Of course I do. He's a good guy. He's fixed my car a few times. Why?" "Just curious. Is he married?" The waitress thought for a moment. "No, he lives with, his boyfriend. His name is Teddy. They're a nice couple, really." "How long have they been together?" 2 or 3 years, I think. How do you know them?" "Work. Thanks." Marcus finished his coffee and paid the bill. 2 or 3 years. Teddy had said the same thing, but something about the story didn't add up. He drove to the office, located in an administrative building on the outskirts of town. The social services department occupied 2 floors, space for employees, archives, and reception rooms. Marcus greeted his colleagues and settled down at his desk. "Marcus," called Jenny, the department secretary, "you have a client." A young woman of about 25 sat in the reception area, nervously clutching her purse. She introduced herself as Lisa Morgan and explained that she needed help finding housing for herself and her 2-year-old son. "Is the child's father helping?" Marcus asked as he filled out the form. "Sometimes, but he's not very reliable." "I see. Do you have a job?" "I work part-time at a laundry. It's not enough to pay the rent." Marcus nodded. He had heard many stories like this. Single mothers trying to survive on minimum wage. He filed an application for housing assistance and gave Lisa a list of organizations that could help with food and clothing for her child. "Thank you," she said as she left. "I don't know what I would do without people like you." After she left, Marcus thought about it. He had chosen this profession to help people who really needed support. Single mothers, children from dysfunctional families, elderly people with no means of support. And it annoyed him when someone abused the system. During his lunch break, he decided to take a walk around town. Bakersfield was a typical medium-sized California city. Wide streets, shopping malls, residential neighborhoods with small houses. He walked to Carter and Sons Auto Repair. The work area was visible through the open gate. Scott Carter was standing at a workbench, taking something apart. He was of medium height, strongly built, with dark hair and tanned skin. A typical working-class guy. Jeans, work boots, plaid shirt. "Good afternoon," Marcus said as he entered the shop. "Are you Scott Carter?" "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "Marcus Stein, Social Services. I wanted to get to know the locals." Scott wiped his hands on a rag and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you. Are you new in town?" 3 months. Moved here from San Francisco. Big change. How do you like it?" "Getting used to it. It's a nice town, friendly people." Marcus looked around. The workshop was small but well kept. The tools were neatly hung up and the workbenches were tidy. It was clear that the owner took his work seriously. "Is this a family business?" he asked. "Yes, I took it over from my father. He worked here for 30 years." "How long have you been married?" Scott tensed for a moment. "I'm not married." "Oh, I'm sorry. I heard you had a partner." "Yes, Teddy. We live together." "I see. How long have you been together?" "A few years." Marcus nodded, watching Scott's reaction. The man was clearly nervous about answering questions about his personal life. That could mean anything from natural privacy to an attempt to hide something. "Well, I won't keep you from work. It was nice meeting you." "Likewise." Leaving the workshop, Marcus walked around the neighborhood. Something about Scott's behavior had alarmed him. His answers were too vague. He avoided eye contact, and he seemed tense. Either he was just a reserved person, or he was hiding something important. In the evening, Marcus decided to stop by the local bar, the Old Time. It was a popular spot among workers and office employees. He ordered a beer and settled in at the bar. "New here, huh?" The bartender, a man in his 50s with a gray beard, asked him. "You guessed right. Marcus Stein, Bob Kennedy. Welcome to our humble town." "Thanks. By the way, do you happen to know Scott Carter?" "Sure I do. Good guy, golden hands. He fixed my generator last week." "Does he come here often?" "He used to, but less often in recent years. They say he's settled down with someone." "With a man?" Bob shrugged. "Times are changing. The main thing is that he's a good person." "Have you seen this partner of his?" "A couple of times. Tall, long hair, an artist, I think. A nice young man." "Do they seem happy?" Bob looked closely at Marcus. "Does it matter? Are you a reporter?" "No, just curious. I work in social services." "I see. Well, what can I say? They seem fine. Not very open, but who's to judge? It's their private life." Marcus agreed and ordered another beer. A conversation with the bartender confirmed his suspicions. Scott and Teddy didn't look like a real couple. They were too reserved, too cautious. The next morning, Marcus decided to do a little investigation. He went to City Hall and asked for access to public records. Tax returns, property records, vehicle registrations, everything was available to the public. Scott Carter owned a house on Maple Street and an auto repair shop. His income was modest, about $40,000 a year. Teddy Harris was registered at the same address, but as a boarder. No joint accounts, no shared purchases. Interesting, Marcus muttered. He also learned that Scott had an elderly mother, Sarah Carter, who was receiving disability benefits. Expensive diabetes treatment, regular hospital bills, a motive for despair. Eleanor Carter, Scott's aunt, owned real estate worth about $500,000, a house on a hill, an investment portfolio, savings accounts. A childless widow who, according to neighbors, loved her nephew very much. Marcus began to see the picture. Scott Carter was in a desperate financial situation. A sick mother, modest income, debts, and Aunt Eleanor was a progressive woman who supported the LGBT community. On Friday evening, Marcus decided to follow Scott and Teddy. He parked in an alley across from their house and waited. Around 7 o'clock, they left the house and got into Scott's pickup truck. They drove to the outskirts of town, to a large 2-story house on a hill. Marcus recognized the address. It was Eleanor Carter's house. They spent about 3 hours there and then returned home. It was interesting to watch their interaction. There were no tender gestures, no kisses or hugs. They acted like good friends, but not like a couple in love. Even actors in movies were more convincing. On Saturday morning, Marcus decided to approach the issue from a different angle. He went to the Rainbow Gay Club, the only establishment of its kind in Bakersfield. It was located in the basement of a shopping mall and was only open on weekends. "Hey, handsome," a young man in a tight t-shirt said to him. "Hi, I'm new in town. I can tell, I'm Kyle. What's your name?" "Marcus." They struck up a conversation. Kyle turned out to be a local who knew all the gay people in town. Marcus cautiously brought up Scott and Teddy. "Those two?" Kyle grimaced. "They don't come here. At all." "Why?" "No idea. Maybe they're shy, or just not the party type." "Do you know them personally?" "I've seen them around town a couple of times. Polite, but cold. Like they're afraid of being seen with us." That was the last straw. Marcus realized that his suspicions were correct. Scott Carter and Teddy Harris were pretending to be a couple. But why? On Sunday morning, he decided to test his theory. He parked near Eleanor Carter's house and began to watch. Around noon, Scott and Teddy arrived. They were dressed more elegantly than usual and were carrying flowers. Marcus approached the house and rang the doorbell. An elderly woman with a kind face opened the door. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Carter. My name is Marcus Stein. I work for social services. I'd like to talk to you about programs for seniors." "Of course, come in. I have guests, my nephew and his friend." In the living room, Marcus saw Scott and Teddy. They were sitting on the sofa, holding hands, but their posture looked unnatural. When Scott saw Marcus, he turned pale. "Do you know each other?" asked Eleanor. "We've met," replied Marcus. "I came by the workshop." "Great! Scott, show Marcus your certificates. He's the best mechanic in town." Marcus spent the next hour watching the couple. They tried their best to look in love, but every gesture seemed rehearsed. Teddy talked about his paintings, and Scott kept the conversation going. Eleanor beamed with happiness at seeing her nephew's love. "Tell me, Marcus," Eleanor asked him, "are you married?" "No, I prefer men." "How wonderful. Then you understand what it was like for Scott to come out to his family. But I've always said, love is love." Marcus felt anger boiling up inside him. This sweet old lady sincerely believed that her nephew had confided his most intimate secret to her, and he had simply taken advantage of her kindness and progressive views. "Yes," he said, looking directly at Scott. "Honesty is very important in relationships." Scott looked away. As he left, Marcus knew he had to do something. But what? Expose the deception? That would break the old woman's heart. Keep quiet? That would make him an accomplice to fraud. That night, he lay awake for a long time, wondering what to do next. Scott Carter was playing with fire, and sooner or later he was bound to get burned. The only question was, who would light the match? Monday began with rain. It was rare for Bakersfield at this time of year, but the drops drummed on the roof of the auto repair shop, creating a gloomy atmosphere. Scott stood by the window, watching the water stream down the glass. Yesterday's meeting with Marcus at Aunt Eleanor's house was still on his mind. "You look tense," Teddy said, entering the workshop with 2 mugs of coffee. "Does that guy know something?" "I don't know. Maybe." Scott took the mug and took a sip. "But there's something in his eyes. He's not just suspicious. He's sure." "What are we going to do?" "Nothing for now. Maybe he'll drop it." But Scott knew that was unlikely. Marcus Stein didn't look like a man who gave up easily. There was a determination in his eyes that was frightening. Jake arrived at work, wet and grumpy. "Damn rain. The roof in the garage is leaking again." "Put a bucket there," Scott replied absently. "We'll take a look after lunch." "Boss, are you okay? You look like a ghost." "I'm fine. Just didn't get enough sleep." But that wasn't true. Scott hadn't slept well for several days. Nightmares, anxious thoughts, a constant feeling of impending doom. 5 years of deception had taught him to be cautious, but now he felt the walls closing in on him. Around noon, Marcus walked into the workshop. He looked determined, and Scott knew immediately that the conversation would be serious. "Scott, we need to talk. Alone." "About what?" "You know what?" Scott nodded to Jake. "Go have lunch. Come back in an hour." When they were alone, Marcus closed the workshop door and turned to Scott. "Enough games. I know you're not gay." Scott felt his heart skip a beat. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do. You and Teddy are pretending to be a couple. I don't know why, but I have my guesses. You're out of your mind." "I've seen real couples. Gay couples. I'm gay myself, Scott. I have experience. You two are acting like bad actors in a school play." Scott was silent, frantically thinking of a way out of the situation. Denial? Threats? Or just kick this guy out of the workshop? "Your aunt is a rich woman," Marcus continued. "Progressive, supports the LGBT community. You have a sick mother and financial problems. It's not hard to put 2 and 2 together." "Even if that's true," Scott said slowly, "what are you going to do about it?" "I've been thinking about this all night. You know, what pisses me off the most isn't that you're lying. It pisses me off that you're using my orientation for your own gain." "Your orientation?" "Yes. You're turning something that's part of who I am and who millions of other people are into a tool for fraud. Do you think this is a game?" Marcus began to pace the workshop, and Scott saw the restrained anger in his movements. "Do you understand what it was like for me to hide from my parents? What it was like to lose friends because of who I am? What it was like to fight for years for the right to just be myself? Marcus, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. But you did. You hurt every gay person who has ever suffered because of prejudice. You turned our lives into a caricature." Scott realized that apologies wouldn't help. This man was deeply hurt not only by the deception, but by the fact that the deception touched on his personal identity. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to stop this damn game. Tell your aunt the truth." "I can't." "Why? Because you will lose your inheritance?" "Because it will kill her!" Scott exploded. "She's so proud that I trusted her. She tells all her friends what a progressive nephew she has. If I tell her I've been lying to her for 5 years, that's your problem, not mine." "I have 2 weeks," Scott said more quietly. "My mother is going in for surgery. Expensive surgery. If I tell her now, Aunt Eleanor will stop helping us. My mother could die." "Don't try to make me feel sorry for you." "I'm not trying. It's the truth." Marcus stopped and looked at Scott. "You know what? Your mother isn't my responsibility. Your lies aren't my problem, but using my identity for your own ends is my problem." "Give me a month," Scott pleaded. "1 month. I'll find a way to fix this." "No. 2 weeks, please." Marcus was silent for a long time. Scott could see anger and something like pity fighting in his eyes. "Okay," he finally said. 2 weeks. But if you don't tell the truth, I will." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for your mother." Marcus left, leaving Scott alone with his thoughts. 2 weeks. 14 days to find a way out of a situation that seemed hopeless. That evening, Scott met Teddy at their favorite bar on the outskirts of town. The place was half empty, which allowed them to speak openly. "He knows," Scott said without even saying hello. "Everything?" "Everything. He gave me 2 weeks to tell Aunt Eleanor the truth." Teddy ordered a whiskey. What are we going to do? I don't know. Maybe we should just call it quits. Tell Aunt Eleanor we broke up. And what do you think she'll think? That you're straight now? Maybe we could say I'm depressed, that I need some time alone. Scott, she's not stupid. She'll know something's wrong. Then what do you suggest? Teddy was silent for a long time, twirling the glass in his hands. What if we convince this guy not to say anything? How? Offer him money. I don't have any money. Then put pressure on him. Find something compromising. Scott looked at his friend in surprise. Are you suggesting we blackmail him? What else? He's blackmailing us. It's not blackmail. It's justice. Justice? Teddy laughed. He's threatening to ruin our lives because of some principles. How is that justice? Maybe he's right. Maybe we've gone too far. Now you understand? After 5 years? Scott didn't answer. He thought about his mother, about the upcoming surgery, about Aunt Eleanor. All these people depended on him, and he was letting them all down. There's another option, Teddy said quietly. What is it? This guy could just disappear. Move to another city. People do it all the time. What do you mean? Nothing specific, just thinking out loud. But there was something in Teddy's voice that made Scott wary. They had been friends since childhood, but in recent years, Teddy had changed. He had become more cynical, more willing to compromise. Don't do anything stupid, Scott said. I'm not, just keeping my eyes open. The next day, Scott tried to work as usual, but his thoughts kept returning to his conversation with Marcus. He knew the social worker wasn't bluffing. In 2 weeks, the truth would come out. His mother called in the afternoon. Son, the doctor says you need surgery right away, next week. How much will it cost? $15,000. Insurance will cover half. Scott closed his eyes. $7,500. Money he didn't have. Don't worry, Mom. I'll figure something out. Maybe you could ask Eleanor? We'll see. But Scott knew he couldn't ask his aunt for money. Not now, when his deception was hanging by a thread. That evening, he drove to Marcus's place. He found the address in the phone book. The apartment was in a new complex on the north side of town. Scott? Marcus was surprised when he opened the door. Can we talk? Come in. The apartment was modestly furnished but tidy. There were several books on social work, photos with friends, and a rainbow poster on the wall. Want some coffee? No thanks. They sat down across from each other. Scott didn't know where to start. Listen, he finally said. I understand how you feel about me. And maybe you're right. But let me explain. I'm listening. 5 years ago, my world fell apart. My father died, leaving debts. My mother got sick. The business was losing money. I was desperate. Scott spoke quietly, not looking at Marcus. I didn't plan to deceive anyone. Aunt Eleanor decided I was gay. She saw me with Teddy and jumped to conclusions. I just didn't correct her. But you developed the deception. You created a whole story. Yes, because I saw how happy she was. For the first time in years, she had someone to care for. She felt needed. That's no excuse. I know, but then it was too late to stop. My mother needed treatment. My aunt was helping with the money. I got so deep into it that I couldn't get out. Marcus was silent. Scott continued. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, especially not people like you. I didn't realize it could hurt anyone. Do you realize it now? Yes, and I'm ashamed. Then stop. I can't. Not now. My mother is going in for surgery. Without my aunt's money, she could die. Find another way. How? Take out a loan? I have a bad credit history. Sell the house? It's mortgaged to pay off my father's debts. Marcus stood up and walked over to the window. That's not my problem. I know, but please give me more time. I'll find a way to get out of this situation gradually. How much time? 6 months, a year. No. A month? 2 weeks. As agreed, Scott realized it was useless to try to convince him. Fine, but know this. If you tell the truth, my mother will die. Her blood will be on your hands. Don't try to shift the blame onto me, Marcus said coldly. You created this situation. Yes, I did, but you can change it. Only the truth can change it. Scott stood up. Then I'll see you in 2 weeks. Scott, Marcus called after him. I'm really sorry about your mother, but I can't keep quiet. It's wrong. Wrong to whom? To Aunt Eleanor? She's happy. To you? It's not your life. It's wrong to everyone who's been lied to, including you." Scott left the apartment feeling like he had crossed a point of no return. 2 weeks. Then everything would come crashing down, and there would be nothing he could do. But maybe Teddy was right. Maybe there were other ways to solve the problem. Not the most honest, but effective. He called Teddy. "Let's meet tomorrow morning. We need to talk." About what? About how to stop Marcus Stein. Wednesday morning began as usual, but there was tension in the air. Scott arrived at the workshop earlier than usual, hoping that work would distract him from thoughts of the impending disaster. There were 10 days left before Marcus's ultimatum, and he still hadn't come up with a solution. Teddy showed up around 9, bringing coffee and wearing a strangely determined expression. "We need to talk," he said, looking around. "Jake isn't here yet. Go ahead." Teddy took a crumpled piece of paper out of his pocket. "I did some digging on our friend Marcus." "What kind of digging?" "It turns out he didn't move here just for work. He had problems in San Francisco. Big problems." Scott took the piece of paper. It was a printout of a news article from a local San Francisco newspaper. "Social worker accused of abuse of authority," he read aloud. "Marcus Stein, 28, an employee of the Department of Family Services, has been temporarily suspended from work following complaints of unethical conduct." "Read on," Teddy urged. "He is accused of attempting to coerce a client into sexual intimacy in exchange for assistance in obtaining welfare benefits. The investigation is ongoing." Scott looked up at his friend. "Where did you get this?" "I have a journalist friend. I asked him to dig around." "And what does that change?" "Everything. This guy's no angel himself. If he tries to turn us in, we'll tell everyone about his past." "Teddy, that's blackmail." "What's he doing to us?" "The same thing." At that moment, Jake entered the workshop, interrupting their conversation. Teddy quickly shoved the paper into his pocket. "Hey guys, what's with the serious faces?" "Discussing plans for the weekend," Scott lied. "I see. By the way, Scott, your mother called. She asked you to call her back." Scott dialed his mother's number, sensing bad news. "Son, the doctor says the operation needs to be done the day after tomorrow, not next week. I've started to get an infection." "The day after tomorrow, but the money." "I know, but the doctor says we can't wait." Scott closed his eyes. Time was up. "Okay, Mom, I'll take care of it." After talking to his mother, Scott decided to meet with Marcus again. Maybe if he explained the situation with the surgery, Marcus would be willing to compromise. He called Marcus at the office. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." "Scott, we've already discussed everything. My mother is having surgery the day after tomorrow. She could die. Give me at least a month." A long pause. "Let's meet at 7 in the evening. Where?" "At my studio." "Okay." Marcus Stein spent the whole day in an internal struggle. On the one hand, he felt sorry for Scott's mother. On the other hand, he couldn't turn a blind eye to the deception that offended him as a gay man. In the 3 months he had been in Bakersfield, he had been unable to find peace after the scandal in San Francisco. False accusations had destroyed his career and reputation. Now he saw someone else using his orientation for personal gain, and it made him feel uncontrollably angry. That evening, Marcus arrived at the workshop. He had deliberately put on a sports jacket. The pepper spray was in his pocket. After the recent events in his life, he had become more cautious. Scott met him at the entrance. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Thanks for coming," Scott said. "Come in." The workshop was half empty. Jake had gone home, and most of the cars had been picked up by their owners. Only a dismantled engine stood in the corner, and tools lay on the workbench. "Teddy not coming?" Marcus asked. "No, this is between us." They sat down opposite each other on plastic chairs. Scott looked depressed but determined. "Listen, Marcus, I understand how you feel about me, and maybe you're right, but give me a chance to make things right." "How?" "Give me a month. I'll gradually tell Aunt Eleanor the truth. I'll tell her that Teddy and I broke up, that I'm rethinking my orientation, and she'll believe you? I don't know, but I'll try to do it gently so I don't break her heart right away." Marcus shook his head. "Scott, you don't understand. It's not just about your aunt. It's about the principle. What principle? You've turned my life into a joke. Marcus's voice grew louder. Do you think it's easy being gay? Do you know what it's like to be afraid to tell your parents? To lose your job because of prejudice? Marcus, I didn't mean to. Didn't mean to? 5 years. 5 years you used my identity to get rich. Scott stood up, trying to calm the angry man down. It's not like that, I just... Shut up! Marcus exploded. Enough excuses! You're a disgusting person! Listen, I understand that you're angry. You don't understand. Marcus stood up too, clenching his fists. In San Francisco, I was falsely accused of harassment. Do you know why? Because my ex-partner couldn't forgive me for breaking up with him. He convinced a client to file a complaint against me. That's terrible, but my career was ruined. I had to move to this godforsaken town and start over. And now I see you turning what I've fought for my whole life into a money-making scheme. Marcus took a step toward Scott, his eyes burning with rage. You know what the worst part is? Your aunt is genuinely proud of you. She tells her friends what a progressive nephew she has, and you're just using her kindness. Marcus, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. Scott backed away toward the workbench. Listen, let's settle this amicably. You need money? I can get it. Money? Marcus laughed hysterically. You think this is about money? This is about you humiliating all of us. All of who? Every gay person who has ever suffered because of prejudice. Everyone who has fought for the right to be themselves. Marcus grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench. Scott saw the movement and tried to dodge. Stop! What are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago. The first blow landed on Scott's shoulder. He screamed in pain and tried to defend himself with his hands. Marcus, stop! You're crazy! Crazy? You're the one who's crazy for thinking you can play with our lives. The second blow was more accurate. The wrench struck Scott in the temple. He fell to his knees, blood flowing from the wound. Please, he croaked. My mother. Your mother? Marcus stood over him with the bloody wrench. What about the mothers of the children who killed themselves because of people like you? Because of those who turn our struggle into a joke? I don't understand. Of course you don't. You'll never understand. The third blow was fatal. Scott Carter fell to the concrete floor of the workshop and did not get up. Marcus stood over the body, breathing heavily. The key fell from his hands and hit the floor with a loud clang. Only now did he begin to understand what had happened. My God, he whispered. What have I done? He crouched down next to the body and checked for a pulse. Scott was dead. Blood slowly spread across the concrete. Marcus sat down on the floor, wrapping his arms around his head. 5 minutes ago, he was a social worker fighting for justice. Now he was a murderer. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from a colleague. Marcus, where are you? You missed an important meeting. Reality hit him. He had to do something. The police, explanations, court, his life was over. Or was it? Marcus looked at Scott's body. Maybe there was a way to avoid punishment? After all, this man was a fraud. He had used other people's pain for his own gain, but that didn't matter now. Only one thing mattered: getting away. Marcus stood up and looked around. The workshop was located in an industrial area, and there was no one around in the evening. His car was parked in the parking lot next to the entrance. He had to cover his tracks and disappear. But where? And how could he explain his sudden departure? Think, he muttered under his breath. A plan began to form in his head. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. The main thing was not to panic and act methodically. He found some rags in the workshop and began to wipe the fingerprints off the tools. Then he wrapped the body in a tarpaulin that was lying in the corner. Loading the body into the car proved more difficult than he had thought. The body was heavy, and Marcus wasn't particularly strong, but adrenaline helped. He drove the body to an old abandoned farm 15 miles from the city. He knew the place well. He passed it on his way to work. He buried it shallowly among the bushes. Back in town, Marcus drove straight home. He took a shower, changed his clothes, and gathered the essentials. He wrote a letter to his boss about a sudden family crisis and the need to leave urgently. By midnight, he was on the road, heading for the state border. The radio was playing in the car, and the announcer was talking about tomorrow's weather. Teddy Harris noticed that something was wrong when Scott didn't answer his calls on Tuesday morning. They had agreed to meet at the workshop at 8 to discuss a plan to deal with Marcus, but Scott was nowhere to be found. "Jake, has Scott been here?" he asked his partner, who was working on the truck's engine. "Number, I thought he was sick. He didn't look well yesterday." Teddy walked around the workshop. Everything was in its place except for one thing. There was a dark stain on the floor near the workbench that looked like engine oil, but something about his demeanor alarmed him. He tried calling Scott again. The phone was off. By lunchtime, his concern had turned to panic. Teddy drove to Scott's house. The pickup truck was in the driveway, but there was no sign of him. The neighbors hadn't seen anything. "Maybe he's at his mother's," Jake suggested when Teddy returned to the workshop. A call to the hospital dashed that hope. Sarah Carter was lying alone in her room. The operation had been postponed due to lack of funds. "Scott was supposed to bring the money last night," said the nurse, "but he didn't show up. It's strange. He was very worried about his mother." Teddy realized that something serious had happened. Scott would never let his mother down, especially at such a critical moment. He drove to the police station. "I want to report a missing person," he said to the sergeant on duty. "Name?" "Scott Carter, 32 years old, disappeared last night." Sergeant Bill Morrison was an experienced police officer who knew half the people in Bakersfield personally. He frowned. "Scott, the auto repair shop owner? That's strange. He's not the type to just disappear." "I don't think so either." "When was he last seen?" "Yesterday afternoon at the shop. He was supposed to go to his mother's hospital, but he never showed up." Morrison wrote down the basic information and promised to start looking for him. But Teddy could see that the cop didn't consider the situation critical. Adults go missing for all kinds of reasons. The next day, the search was expanded. Patrol cars drove around the city and checked hospitals in neighboring counties. The result was zero. Eleanor Carter arrived at the station on Thursday morning. The 78-year-old woman looked distraught and frightened. "Sergeant, my nephew isn't the type to just walk away," she said in a trembling voice. "He has a sick mother and a business. He would have let us know." "Mrs. Carter, we're doing everything we can." "That's not enough. You need to organize a real search." Morrison nodded. Eleanor was influential in the town. She donated to the local hospital and school and knew the mayor personally. "All right, we'll issue an official search warrant." By Friday, the story was in the local news. "Auto repair shop owner missing. Police searching for Scott Carter." The headlines stirred up the small community of Bakersfield. Teddy gave an interview to a local TV station. "Scott is my best friend," he said to the camera. "We've lived together for 2 years. He would never leave without telling me." The reporter asked the obvious question. Did Mr. Carter have any enemies? Any reason to disappear? None. Scott was a simple mechanic. He helped people fix their cars. Everyone loved him. But these words made one person sit up and take notice. Detective Anna Rodriguez from the county department arrived in Bakersfield to lead the investigation. An experienced investigator with 20 years on the job, she had an eye for detail. "Something's not right here," she said to Morrison after watching the interview. "What do you mean?" "This Teddy guy. He says they've been living together for 2 years, but he calls himself his best friend. Isn't that strange? Maybe he's camera shy. Maybe, but I want to talk to him in person." The interview took place on Saturday. Teddy was nervous as he answered the detective's questions. "Tell me about your relationship with Scott," Rodriguez said. "We're partners. We live together." "Romantic relationship?" "Yes." "How long?" 2 years. "And before that, you were just friends?" "Yes, since childhood." Rodriguez took notes. "Did Scott tell his family about your relationship?" "Yes, his aunt supports us." "And his mother?" Teddy hesitated. "She doesn't approve of our relationship." "I see. Did Scott have any problems? Debts? Conflicts?" "Financial difficulties. His mother is ill and her treatment is expensive." "Could he have left because of the debts?" "Never. He would never abandon his mother." The detective nodded and let Teddy go, but she still had her doubts. That evening, she met with Eleanor Carter. "Tell me about your nephew," Rodriguez asked. "Scott is a wonderful boy, hardworking, caring. After my brother died, he became like a son to me. I know he has a partner, Teddy." Eleanor's face lit up. "Yes, he's a wonderful young man. I'm so glad Scott found love." "How long have they been together?" "About 2 years officially, but I suspected it before." "What do you mean?" "Scott was always special. He wasn't interested in girls at school. I'm a progressive woman, I understand these things." Rodriguez wrote down every word. "Did Scott tell you about his orientation himself?" "Not right away. He was shy at first, but I made it clear that I accepted him for who he is." "And how did he react?" "He was very grateful. He said he was afraid of my reaction." "Did you help them financially?" "Sometimes. When Sarah had health problems, families should support each other." After talking to Eleanor, the detective was convinced that something didn't add up. There were too many inconsistencies, too many oddities. On Monday, she decided to check the workshop more thoroughly. Together with a forensic expert, they examined every corner. "Here," said the expert, pointing to a stain near the workbench. "This isn't machine oil." "Then what is it?" "Blood. Quite a lot of blood." Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. "Take samples and check all surfaces for fingerprints." The blood analysis took 2 days. The results confirmed her worst fears. It was Scott Carter's blood. "Now it's officially a murder case," Rodriguez told Morrison. "Who could have killed him?" "Good question. Did he have any enemies?" "I don't know, but I'll check." The detective started with his immediate circle: Teddy, his family, his workshop clients. Gradually, a picture began to emerge. "Interesting detail," she said to her assistant a week later. "The day before Scott disappeared, a social worker named Marcus Stein suddenly left town. Coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences. Find out everything you can about this Marcus." The information was intriguing. Marcus Stein had moved to Bakersfield 3 months ago from San Francisco. The reason for the move was a scandal at his previous job. "Allegations of unethical behavior," Rodriguez read from the file. "Coercing a client into intimacy. The charges were dropped, but his reputation is ruined." "Do you think he's connected to Scott's disappearance?" "We need to find him and ask him." The search for Marcus took another week. His car was found in a parking lot at a shopping center in Los Angeles. He was renting a room in a cheap motel under a false name. The arrest took place early Thursday morning. "Marcus Stein, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Scott Carter," Rodriguez said as she handcuffed him. "I don't know anything about his murder," Marcus replied, but his voice was shaking. "We'll see." The interrogation lasted 6 hours. At first, Marcus denied everything, but gradually his defense crumbled. "Okay," he finally said. "I killed him, but it's not what you think." "Then explain." Marcus told the whole story. Scott's deception, 5 years of lies, using his gay identity to get an inheritance. "He turned my life into a farce," he said. "My orientation is not a tool for enrichment." "And that's why you killed him?" "I didn't plan to kill him, I just lost it." "He didn't understand what he was doing." "Where's the body?" Marcus pointed to a spot on the map. An abandoned farm 15 miles outside of town. The body was found the next day. Scott Carter had been dead for 2 weeks. The news shook Bakersfield. Local residents couldn't believe that a quiet social worker was capable of murder. But the hardest blow was to Eleanor Carter. She learned the truth about her nephew from the news. "Police have established a motive for the murder," the reporter said. "Scott Carter pretended to be gay for 5 years to get his rich aunt's inheritance. The killer, Marcus Stein, discovered the deception and demanded that the charade end." Eleanor sat in her home, clutching a photo of her nephew. 5 years of love, support, and pride. All a lie. "Why, Scott?" she whispered. "Why couldn't you just ask for help?" Teddy was also going through a difficult time. He testified about his role in the deception and received a suspended sentence for fraud. But the main punishment was guilt. "I should have stopped him," he told his lawyer. "I knew it would end badly." Sarah Carter underwent surgery paid for by a city relief fund. Eleanor anonymously paid for the treatment, despite the pain of her son's betrayal. "He was my nephew after all," she told a social worker, "and his mother is not to blame for his mistakes." Marcus Stein's trial took place 6 months later. The jury heard testimony about his difficult past and the discrimination he had experienced as a gay man. "My client does not condone his actions," his defense attorney said, "but he was driven to extremes by the systematic abuse of his identity." The prosecutor objected. "No one has the right to kill because of personal grievances. Scott Carter deserved a trial, not the death penalty." The sentence was harsh, 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. "Your suffering does not justify murder," the judge told Marcus. "You took the life of a man who, despite his faults, did not deserve to die." Marcus accepted the sentence in silence. In his prison cell, he wrote a letter to Eleanor Carter. "I know my apology won't change anything, but I want you to know that I regret what happened. Your nephew was wrong, but death is too harsh a punishment for a lie." Eleanor did not reply to the letter, but she kept it in a box next to Scott's photographs. A year later, she sold the house and moved into a nursing home. She left most of her fortune to charities. "I don't want that money to ruin anyone else," she explained to her lawyer. Teddy left Bakersfield shortly after the trial. He was last seen at the bus station with a suitcase and an easel. Carter and Sons Auto Repair was sold to pay off debts. An auto parts store now stands in its place. Sarah Carter recovered from her surgery. She visits her son's grave every Sunday, leaving flowers and talking quietly to the headstone. "I still love you," she whispers, "no matter what you do." Scott Carter's story became a warning to the residents of Bakersfield about how lies can destroy lives, about how even the best intentions do not justify deception. Detective Rodriguez transferred to another county 2 years later, but the Carter case remained one of the most memorable of her career. "It's a sad story," she told a colleague before leaving. "Everyone involved was a victim, the killer, the victim, and those who loved them." Marcus Stein is serving time in state prison. He works in the library, helping illiterate inmates learn to read. Once a month, he is visited by a psychologist. "Do you regret what you did?" the doctor asks. "Every day," Marcus replies, "but regret won't bring him back." In his cell, he has a newspaper photo of Scott, not as a reminder of his hatred, but as a monument to what anger can lead to. "I'm sorry," he whispers sometimes, looking at the picture. "You were wrong, but I was worse." Eleanor Carter died peacefully in her sleep 2 years later. Few people attended her funeral. Most of the people she loved had passed away before her. In her will, she left a final note. "Love should be unconditional. I loved Scott not for who he pretended to be, but for who he was. I wish he had understood that." Bakersfield is still the same town, quiet, unhurried, where everyone knows everyone else. But now the residents are more cautious about keeping secrets, and they understand that sometimes the truth hurts less than a lie. The story is over, but its lessons remain. That despair does not justify deception. That anger does not justify murder. And that the most tragic stories happen when good people make bad choices.